isn't until Thursday, fellas, but quite a few teams got a little spooked a little early this past week. So let's take a look at the ranked teams that narrowly avoided an upset but had themselves a case of the Saturday Scaries. Texas barely escaped from Nashville with a 3-point win over Vanderbilt, 27-24, despite having a 2-touchdown lead in the game. Quinn Ewers threw for 3 scores, extending his streak to 19 games with a touchdown pass. That's the longest by a Longhorn since Colt McCoy in 2007 and 09. Now, Kansas State had to work to fend off lowly in-state rival Kansas. A 51-yard field goal by Chris Tennant with under 2 minutes left gave the Wildcats their 16th straight win over Kansas, which extends the longest win streak by either team in series history. And a wild one in Durham. SMU defense stepping up to stop Duke's 2-point conversion attempt in overtime, securing a 28-27 win. SMU overcame Kevin Jennings' 5 turnovers, while SMU's 6 turnovers were the team's most in a game since 2017. Nebraska gave Ohio State a scare in the shoe. Will Howard's go-ahead 9-yard touchdown with 6 to go in the game secured the 21-17 win. It was the Buckeyes' 45th straight win versus an unranked opponent, the longest active streak in the FBS. And
they have the weapons that no matter who lines up at the quarterback position, they'll be just fine and comfortable going up against Ohio State's defense.
Well, they may have the weapons, Daz, but the game plan may need to change. If Bo Pribula is at quarterback, he's not as good of a thrower as Drew Aller. And so I could expect, yes, more run game, but more specifically, more quarterback run. That'll be probably a difference in this game. Pribula on the quarterback keepers. Now, of course, Ohio State may be ready for that if Pribula's at QB. And so that'll be part A of this game plan if Penn State wants to beat Ohio State. Part B is also the defense of Penn State. Last week, Penn State was losing versus Wisconsin in the second half until that pick six gave them the lead. And so if you're playing an Ohio State team that struggled really to throw the ball downfield, maybe a defensive score can be the recipe for a success with a backup quarterback.
Now, Penn State is 20-0 in Big Ten play versus teams not named Ohio State. But let's get to the other side of the ball with Ohio State, because they have not shaped up to be the team that we thought they were. Now, we saw this weekend how at home they were behind in the fourth quarter against an unranked Nebraska until a touchdown in 6 minutes remaining saved them from a second straight loss. But, Sam, what is your concern level for Ohio State?
Yeah, it's relatively high for a team that just has one loss. Ohio State is a team with tremendous talent on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. Yet last week versus Nebraska, we saw them struggle to really get it going offensively. Defense, I have no concerns, but offensively, I want to see Will Howard throw the ball downfield more. And yes, you might still be able to win versus lesser opponents with the big-time run game. But what happens when you play a defense that shuts down the run and that tries to shut down Jeremiah Smith? Will Howard's going to have to grow in his opportunities to stretch defenses so that they can't dial in on Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson.
Yeah, Sam, I agree with you. They have a lot of talent, and we saw that in the early part of the season when they were playing inferior opponents, and they looked like they were dominating guys left and right. Now there have been some question marks that's come up because of the way they struggled defensively on the road against Oregon. Oregon could have put almost 41 points on them, left some points on the field that day. And the first 5 games, you got an offense that averaged, 46 points a game, only allowed 6.8. Then the last 2 games, when the competition has become a little more stellar, they've only averaged 26 points on offense, and they've given up 24 points. So what happens in this situation is, I kind of look at Ryan Day and his staff like they really didn't know what they had early in the season. They had big-name talents, right? They brought in Judkins. They brought in Will Howard, right? They brought in Caleb Downs. Big-name talent. But you get a false impression of how great you are when you're going up and down the field against inferior opponents. So they really didn't know what they had. The Oregon game, when they came up against talent that's equal to theirs, now you look at Jim Knowles on defense. You look at Chip Kelly on offense. Now they understand just what they have talent-wise when things get tough and things get thick. So now I thought coming out of the bye week, we will see a better performance. But then Nebraska gave them all that they can handle, too. And to be honest, Nebraska, talent-wise, isn't on the same level as Ohio State when you look at recruiting and we look at the $20 million they spent during the offseason to bring the talent in.
Yeah, well, I have one counterpoint to that, though, Des, because we're bringing a lot and talking a lot about the game against Oregon, the loss versus Oregon. But let's not forget, if it weren't for I would call it brilliant timeout by Dan Lanning to cause that penalty, that actually a game that Ohio State could and would have won. And this whole conversation could be different. It could be an undefeated, #1 ranked Ohio State team. And so I think that, yes, they need to play significantly better. But the great thing about this game of football is that those players on the football field have an opportunity to rise to the occasion and show that they can not only compete against inferior opponents, but also win against an opponent like Penn State.
And let's take a look at the All-State playoff predictor to see who are the biggest risers after Week 9. BYU and Texas A&M got the biggest jump to make the playoff this week. Both teams' playoff chances went up by 15%, while Alabama's big shutout victory spiked its chances only by 10%. Now, the Aggies' 47% playoff chances are the lowest by any team from the top 5 risers. All right, it is time for our playoff contenders and pretenders, starting with Texas A&M, who is currently first in the SEC. Playoff contender or pretender, Sam?
They are a contender, a dominant contender. A&M is a team that's showing up on both sides of the ball, but I want to focus on their defense. Their defense last week versus LSU forced 3 interceptions. Their defense, in another ranked win versus Missouri, completely dominated. And then the offensive side of the ball, they're finding ways to get the ball into the end zone. A&M is a dangerous team right now that I go back to that end of season game versus Texas, the first time they'll be playing in over a decade at Kyle Field. That could be a game that gets A&M not only into the college football playoff, but as one of the top few ranked teams.
All right, BYU won at UCF despite being underdogs. Playoff contender or pretender, Des?
Guys, I could not believe that they were an underdog. I was on game day talking about stop the disrespect, okay? Show the Cougars some love. I think they're a contender. I really do think that they will contend for a college football playoff. I like their style. They're gritty. They're physical, very disciplined, one of the least penalized teams in the FBS. And they already smashed Kansas State 38-9, and they do not have Iowa State on their regular season schedule.
Give them their flowers, Des. We love it. All right, Notre Dame destroyed Navy's undefeated streak by 37 points. Playoff contender or pretender, Sam?
Notre Dame is now a contender. Before I had some question marks, now those questions have been answered. Why? 2 reasons. Number one, the way in which they beat Navy. That's the way that you would expect Notre Dame to beat a team like Navy. But here's the real reason why they're a playoff contender. Because I go back to their Week 1 win versus A&M, a team that's going to be in the top 5 or top 10 as they continue to play this way. The playoff committee is going to circle that win and say that's a really good football team that Notre Dame beat. They'll have wins over Navy, potentially Army, and it's going to look good for Notre Dame.
All right, Pitt still undefeated, coming off a massive win over Syracuse. Playoff contender or pretender, Des?
I really do think that they're a contender. I love their style of play. I'm a huge fan of Pat Narduzzi. He's an old school coach. These guys are playing really good on defense. They're kicking butt, taking names. They got a player named Desmond Reed, who's number 0, who's just an all-around like weapon as a running back. There he is right there coming out the backfield. He has 4 touchdowns through the air, so he can catch. I love the way that this Pitt team plays. You look at their schedule. They got UVA. They get Clemson at home. And then they have at Louisville and at Boston College against the fighting Bill O'Brien. So I think they're a contender.
All right.